Exhausted pediatric nurse Elena Reyes is barely keeping her head above water, working double shifts to support her resentful teenage brother while still grieving their parents' deaths. When tech millionaire Marcus Whitfield's son has a medical crisis only Elena can calm, he makes her an offer that could solve all her problems. But as Elena crosses the divide between their worlds, she never expected the cost of her kindness would be this cruel. Before we continue, consider my humble request to like and subscribe. It's completely free. Elena Reyes rubbed her eyes as the fluorescent lights of the pediatric ward buzzed overhead. 16 hours into what was supposed to be a 12-hour shift, and her feet ached inside her worn white sneakers. The coffee in her hand had gone cold hours ago, but she sipped it anyway, needing whatever caffeine remained. "Elena, you're still here?" Dr. Patel's voice carried quiet concern as she approached the nurse's station. "Didn't your shift end at 7? Elena smiled weakly. "Marissa's son got sick. I offered to cover until night shift arrives." Dr. Patel frowned. "That's the third double this week. You can't keep this up." "I'm fine," Elena said, the phrase so automatic she barely registered saying it anymore. "Miguel needs new school shoes, and the rent went up again." She didn't mention the college fund she was desperately trying to maintain for her brother, the one their parents had started before the accident. Her phone vibrated with a text. Miguel again. "Don't bother picking up dinner. I'm not hungry." Elena sighed. At 16, her brother had mastered the art of saying everything and nothing in the same breath. She was losing him, one missed dinner at a time. "Go home," Dr. Patel said, her hand gentle on Elena's shoulder. "Whatever emergency comes through those doors tonight, we can handle it without you." As if on cue, the emergency doors slid open. A man in an expensive suit carried a small boy, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "My son," he said, voice tight. "He needs help now." The boy's face was pale, lips slightly blue. Elena recognized the signs immediately. Congenital heart condition, possible arrhythmia. Dr. Patel moved forward, but Elena was already reaching for the child. "I'm Elena. I'll be your nurse," she said, her exhaustion vanishing. "What's your name, buddy?" "Theo," the boy whispered, his small hand gripping her scrubs. "My chest hurts really bad this time." "We'll fix that," Elena promised, not looking at the father's anxious face. "Dr. Patel is the best doctor in the whole hospital." As they moved Theo to an exam room, the father followed, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum. "I'm Marcus Whitfield. My son has hypoplastic left heart syndrome. His cardiologist is Dr. Rosen at Mercy General." Elena nodded, already checking Theo's vitals. "We'll contact Dr. Rosen right away." "I've already called him," Marcus said. "He's on his way, but he's 20 minutes out. I brought Theo here because it was closer." His voice held the edge of someone used to taking charge, to having his instructions followed without question. 4 hours later, Theo was stabilized and admitted. Elena had long since missed her bus home, but something about the scared little boy kept her at his bedside. His father sat rigidly in the visitor's chair, typing furiously on his phone between anxious glances at the monitors. "You should try to rest," Elena told him. "He's stable now." Marcus looked up, seeming to really see her for the first time. "You're still here? I thought shifts changed." "They did," Elena said simply. Marcus nodded, then returned to his phone. Elena recognized the behavior. Fear disguised as busyness. She'd seen it in parents before, the desperate need to control something when their child's health was beyond their power. When she finally left the hospital, the night air was cool against her face. Her apartment was dark when she unlocked the door, but the light from Miguel's room spilled into the hallway. She knocked softly. "I'm studying," came his muffled reply. Elena opened the door anyway. Miguel sat at his desk, headphones around his neck, math textbook open but clearly untouched. The sketchpad beside it showed a detailed drawing of an engine part. "You need to eat something," she said. "I told you I wasn't hungry." His voice held that new edge, the one that had emerged in the months after their parents' accident. Once, he would have greeted her with a hug, eager to tell her about his day. Now, at 16, he seemed to look through her. "Miguel, I'm doing my best. Your best keeps you at that hospital instead of here," he said, turning back to his sketch. "Just like Dad was always at the garage instead of at my games." The comparison stung. "That's not fair. I'm working these hours so we can keep this apartment so you can go to college someday." "I never asked for that." He closed his textbook with unnecessary force. "You keep acting like you're Mom and Dad now, but you're not. You're just gone all the time." Elena leaned against the doorframe, too tired to stand straight. "I have a new patient, a little boy with a heart condition. His dad brought him in tonight." So he reminded me of you when you were little, after your appendix surgery, remember? You were so scared." Miguel's eyes softened slightly, then hardened again. "I'm not little anymore." "No," Elena agreed. "You're not." She wanted to cross the room, to smooth his hair like she used to. Instead, she said, "There's leftover lasagna in the fridge. Please eat something before bed." Back in her own small bedroom, Elena set her alarm for 5:30, knowing she needed to be back at the hospital by 7. As she drifted toward sleep, her phone chimed with a text. "Good night. There better be coffee when I wake up." The real kind, not that instant garbage. Elena smiled, recognizing Miguel's version of a peace offering. "Deal. Love you, hermano. Whatever," came his reply, which Elena knew was as close to "love you too" as she would get these days. 3 days later, Elena was assigned as Theo's primary nurse during his hospital stay. The boy was easy to care for, polite in a way that seemed almost rehearsed, like he'd learned early how to not be a burden. His father was more challenging, questioning every medication, every procedure, his intense focus masking what Elena recognized as fear. "You have excellent references," Marcus said one afternoon, scrolling through his phone as she checked Theo's vitals. "Northwestern nursing program, top of your class. Why are you still working hospital shifts instead of private practice? The salary difference must be substantial." Elena bristled at the presumption. "I like it here. Every day is different and the kids need consistency." Marcus looked up, studying her with newfound interest. Admirable, if financially impractical. Before Elena could respond, Theo's monitors began to alarm. His heart rate spiked, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "He's having a panic attack," Elena said, recognizing the signs beneath the medical symptoms. She lowered her voice, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. "Theo, can you hear me? You're safe." The boy's eyes were wide with fear, darting between the monitors and his father's alarmed expression. "Should I get the doctor?" Marcus was already reaching for the call button, his composure fracturing. "Not yet." Elena moved between Marcus and the bed, blocking Theo's view of his father's panic. She took the boy's hand, her voice dropping to a gentle cadence. "Theo, let's count the stars together." Confusion flickered across his face, momentarily interrupting his distress. "The stars?" he whispered between shallow breaths. "When I was little, my mother taught me the constellations." Elena traced an invisible pattern on his blanket. "When things feel scary, I imagine them. First Orion, with his 3-star belt." She drew the shape on his hand. "Then Ursa Major, the Great Bear." Theo's eyes fixed on her finger as she continued tracing constellations on his palm, his breathing gradually slowing to match her calm, steady voice. The monitor's frantic beeping subsided. "That's it," she encouraged. "Now Cassiopeia, shaped like a wobbly W." "I know that one," Theo whispered, his color improving. "Dad has a star app on his tablet." "Is that right?" Elena smiled. "Maybe you can teach me some I don't know." As Theo's vitals stabilized, Elena became aware that Marcus had disappeared. She continued her constellation story, until Theo's eyes grew heavy, the combination of medication and relief pulling him towards sleep. When she finally stepped out of the room, she found Marcus standing in the hallway, a coffee cup gripped so tightly in his hand that the lid had crumpled. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't speaking to doctors. He was simply watching through the door's window as his son slept peacefully. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "The doctors usually sedate him when this happens." Elena nodded. Sometimes medicine isn't the first answer. "My wife knew how to calm him." Marcus stared into his coffee. "She could talk him through anything. Since she died, I've been inadequate." The admission seemed to cost him, vulnerability at odds with his tailored suit and commanding presence. "You got him here in time," Elena said. "That's not inadequate." Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You should go home. Your shift ended hours ago." Elena glanced at her watch, startled to find it was nearly midnight. "Miguel's going to kill me," she muttered. "Your husband?" "My brother. I'm supposed to be helping him with a science project tonight." She rubbed her eyes, exhaustion settling back into her bones now that the emergency had passed. "He's 16. Everything is a federal case these days." Marcus nodded, seeming to understand. "I'll have my driver take you home." "That's not necessary. It's midnight, and I'm guessing you've been here since this morning. It's necessary." The black sedan that delivered Elena home felt wildly out of place in front of her apartment building. She thanked the driver and hurried inside, already composing apologies to Miguel in her head. She found him asleep at the kitchen table, his science materials spread across the surface. A cold cup of coffee sat by his hand. The real kind, not instant, she noted, with a stab of guilt. He'd remembered their deal, while she had forgotten her promise to be home. "Miguel," she said softly, touching his shoulder, "let's get you to bed." He stirred, blinking groggily. "You missed it," he mumbled, half asleep. "The whole thing is due tomorrow." "I'm sorry, one of my patients had an emergency." Miguel sat up, awareness bringing disappointment to his face. "It's always an emergency, Elena. That's your whole life now." She had no good answer, so she helped him gather his materials instead. "What's the project?" "Heart models." He held up a half-constructed cardboard creation. "Ironic, right? Since you're always with heart patients instead of here." The barb landed as intended, but Elena refused to show it. "I can help you finish it now." "It's midnight. I'll just turn in what I have and take the C." He stood, gathering his things, his movements stiff with resentment. "Miguel, don't." He cut her off. "Just don't. I get it. Sick kids need you more than I do." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He paused at his bedroom door. "You know what's funny? Dad always said family comes first, but he was never home either. At least he had an excuse. He was trying to save enough for college for both of us. What's your excuse? Those kids have their own families. I just have you." His door closed with quiet finality, somehow worse than if he had slammed it. Elena sat at the kitchen table until dawn, finishing his heart model. It wasn't much, but it was something she could fix. When she returned to the hospital the next day, operating on 3 hours of sleep, she found Marcus Whitfield waiting at the nurse's station. "Mr. Whitfield, is Theo all right?" "He's fine, better than yesterday." Marcus gestured to the family consultation room. "Could we speak privately?" The small room, designed for difficult conversations with families, felt even smaller with Marcus's presence. He didn't sit. "I'd like to make you an offer," he said, without preamble. "Theo will be discharged next week. He needs a private nurse during his recovery, someone who understands his condition and who he trusts." Elena blinked, processing his words. "You want to hire me?" 3 months initially, triple your current salary, 8-hour shifts only, 5 days a week. He stated the terms like business points. "You'd have access to the guest house on my property, though residing there isn't required." The amount he named made Eleanor's breath catch. 3 months at that salary would cover a year of their rent, with enough left over to replenish Miguel's depleted college fund. "Why me?" she asked, caution threading through hope. "There are specialized pediatric cardiac nurses with private practice experience. Because my son, who has panic attacks with every new person in his life, fell asleep holding your hand." Marcus's businesslike facade cracked slightly. "That hasn't happened since his mother died." Elena thought of Miguel, of his half-finished science project, and bitter disappointment, of his accusation that she was never home. "I'd need regular hours," she said slowly. "My brother, your schedule would be predictable, unlike here. No overnight shifts, no last-minute emergencies." The offer dangled before her like a lifeline. Regular hours, better pay. 1 patient instead of 12. "I need to think about it," she said, "and discuss it with my brother." Marcus nodded once. "Of course, Theo will remain here for 5 more days. You have until then to decide." That evening, Elena prepared Miguel's favorite dinner, her mother's enchiladas with extra cheese, and waited for him to return from school. When he finally arrived, he eyed the food suspiciously. "What's the occasion? Did someone die?" "Very funny." Elena set a plate in front of him. "I wanted to talk to you about something, a job opportunity." Miguel stopped mid-bite, his fork hovering between plate and mouth. "What kind of job?" Elena explained Marcus's offer, carefully emphasizing the regular hours and better pay. "It would mean I'd be home every evening by 6. No more overnight shifts, no more missed science projects." Miguel set his fork down, his expression hardening. "So you'd be what? Some rich guy's personal servant?" "A private nurse for his son," Elena corrected. "Theo has a serious heart condition." "And you'd work in their mansion?" "It's a temporary position, 3 months. Then I can return to the hospital if I want." Miguel pushed his plate away, appetite gone. "So you're trading the hospital for a rich family that can buy your time. Just admit it's about the money." "It's about balance, Miguel. Right now, I'm stretched so thin, I'm failing at everything. Being your sister, being a good nurse. This way, Dash. This way you get to play mum to some other kid while I'm still stuck with no parents," Miguel interrupted, his voice rising. "At least before you were helping lots of kids who needed it. Now you're just selling out to one rich family." "That's not fair," Elena said, her own temper flaring. "I've been trying to be everything for you since Mom and Dad died, working doubles, missing sleep, taking extra shifts for the overtime. Do you have any idea how hard that's been?" As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Miguel's face went blank, the carefully constructed mask he wore when someone mentioned their parents. "No, Elena, I have no idea how hard it's been," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "because I was only 14 when they died, and all I lost was my entire world. But please, tell me more about your sacrifices." He stood, leaving his dinner untouched. "Take the job. You clearly want to. Just stop pretending it has anything to do with me." The door to his room closed with quiet finality. Elena accepted Marcus's offer the next day. Dr. Patel supported her decision, though she extracted a promise that Elena would return to the hospital at least part-time after the 3 months. "That boy isn't the only one who needs you," she said, hugging Elena goodbye. "The children here do too." Her last few days at the hospital passed in a blur of farewells and preparations. At home, Miguel maintained a cold distance, speaking only when necessary. Elena told herself things would improve once her new schedule gave them more time together. The Whitfield estate existed in another world from Elena's apartment. Wrought iron gates opened onto a winding driveway, flanked by immaculate landscaping. The house itself was modern and glass-fronted, perched on a hillside overlooking the city. An older woman named Mrs. Collins met Elena at the door, her expression measuring as she showed Elena to the guest house, a structure larger than Eleanor's entire apartment. Mr. Whitfield had the place fully stocked, Mrs. Collins explained, opening the refrigerator to reveal prepared meals. You'll take most dinners at the main house with Theo, of course. The boy needs normalcy. Eleanor nodded, wondering if Mrs. Collins knew her own refrigerator at home often contained nothing but coffee creamer and Miguel's energy drinks. I'll be commuting from my apartment, Eleanor explained. My brother needs me at home. Mrs. Collins raised an eyebrow. As you wish, though the traffic will be considerable. Theo's room was on the main floor of the house, modified to accommodate his medical needs while still looking like a child's bedroom. Star charts covered one wall, and a sophisticated telescope stood by the window. Eleanor! Theo's face lit up when she entered. Dad said you might be coming to work here, but I wasn't sure if you'd say yes. How could I say no to my favorite patient? She set down her medical bag, noting with approval the monitoring equipment already installed. I see you like stars. Mum was an astronomer, Theo explained, pointing to a framed photograph on his nightstand, a pretty woman with Theo's same serious eyes. She taught at the university. Dad got me her telescope after she died. Is that how you knew Cassiopeia? Eleanor asked, recalling their conversation at the hospital. Theo nodded. Mum said the stars are always there, even when we can't see them. Like her. His matter-of-fact tone held the peculiar wisdom of children who've faced mortality too young. Eleanor established a routine quickly. Mornings were for Theo's medications, physical therapy, and tutoring with his home teacher. Afternoons allowed for rest and carefully monitored play. She kept detailed records of his progress, noting with satisfaction that his episodes of anxiety decreased as the days passed. Marcus remained largely absent during daylight hours, leaving for his office before Eleanor arrived and returning just in time for dinner. Those meals were formal affairs at first, with Theo minding his manners and Marcus attempting awkward conversation. How was school today? He would ask, as if reading from a parenting manual. Good, Theo would answer dutifully. Mr. Jacob says my math is improving. Eleanor found herself filling the silences, sharing stories from the hospital that made Theo laugh. Gradually, the dinners softened into something less staged, with Marcus occasionally lingering afterwards, rather than retreating to his home office. 2 weeks into her new position, Eleanor arrived home to find Miguel's backpack missing and a note on the kitchen table. Staying at Danny's for the weekend. Don't wait up. She called Danny's mother, who confirmed Miguel was there, working on a group project. He's welcome anytime, she assured Elena. Danny loves having him over. Relief mingled with sadness. Miguel had stopped waiting for her, had created his life separate from hers. Wasn't that what teenagers were supposed to do? Yet it felt like failure. On Monday, she arrived at the Whitfield house to find Marcus waiting in the kitchen, a rare occurrence in their morning routine. I'd like to invite your brother to dinner, he said, without preamble. Theo mentions him often, since you've told stories about him. I think it would be good for Theo to have another young person around. Eleanor hesitated. I'm not sure Miguel would be comfortable here. Because we're wealthy? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Or because he resents your working for us? His perception surprised her. Both, maybe. Things have been strained. All the more reason to bridge the gap, Marcus said. Friday night, tell him there's a state-of-the-art gaming system that Theo never uses because he has no one to play with. It was a transparent ploy, but Elena found herself smiling. I'll try. Miguel's response was predictably unenthusiastic. Dinner with your boss? Hard pass. He's not my boss, he's my employer, Eleanor corrected. And Theo really wants to meet you. He's a good kid, Miguel. He's been through a lot. So have I, Miguel muttered, but she could see his resistance wavering. What am I supposed to wear to dinner with millionaires? Whatever you want, just be yourself. Miguel rolled his eyes. Yeah, Because rich people love when you be yourself, unless yourself wears designer labels. 7 o'clock Friday, Elena said firmly. One dinner, that's all I'm asking. Friday evening arrived with Miguel dressed in his nicest jeans and button-down shirt, his hair combed neatly for once. His nervousness manifested as sarcasm during the drive. Should I call him sir? Or is there a special rich person title I don't know about? Just call him Mr. Whitfield, Elena said patiently. And Theo is excited to meet you. Be nice. I'm always nice, Miguel protested, then grew quiet as they pulled through the gates. Damn, he whispered as the house came into view. You didn't say it was a literal mansion. Theo was waiting by the door, bouncing slightly with excitement. You're Elena's brother. She says you're really good at science and drawing. Do you want to see my room? I have a telescope that can see Jupiter's moons. Miguel shot Elena a helpless look as Theo grabbed his hand, tugging him inside. She smiled encouragingly, hoping the evening wouldn't be a disaster. Dinner started awkwardly. Miguel sat stiffly in his chair, eyeing the multiple forks beside his plate with suspicion. Marcus arrived late, his phone buzzing with emails he checked between attempts at conversation. Elena tells me you're interested in engineering, Marcus said to Miguel during the main course. Miguel glanced at his sister. Yeah, mechanical stuff, mostly. Miguel rebuilt our neighbor's motorcycle engine last summer, Elena said proudly. Mr. Guzman said he did better work than the shop downtown. Is that right? Marcus seemed genuinely interested. I started in mechanical engineering before moving to software. My first job was at an auto shop. Miguel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. You worked at a garage? Through college, changed oil, rebuilt transmissions, whatever paid the bills. Marcus smiled slightly at Miguel's obvious disbelief. Not everyone is born into money, contrary to what people assume. Dad owned a garage, Miguel said quietly. Reyes Auto Service on Fulton Street. I know it, Marcus said. Good reputation. Honest work. Something shifted in Miguel's posture, a subtle relaxing. Elena hadn't seen him engage with an adult male like this since their father died. Can I show Miguel the workshop? Theo piped up, breaking his unusual silence. Please, Dad. Marcus checked his watch. It's getting late. I don't mind, Miguel interrupted, surprising Elena. If that's okay. The workshop turned out to be a state-of-the-art makerspace in what was once the estate's carriage house. 3D printers stood alongside traditional tools with half-finished projects organized on workbenches. Dad and I build stuff on weekends sometimes, Theo explained, showing Miguel a small robot they'd constructed. But I'm not very good with the tools yet. This is incredible, Miguel whispered, running his hand over a lathe. You could build anything here. Marcus watched from the doorway, something softening in his expression. It doesn't get used enough. I'm afraid I'm better with digital creations than physical ones these days. The evening ended with Miguel and Theo exchanging phone numbers, an unexpected development that left Elena cautiously hopeful. On the drive home, Miguel was uncharacteristically quiet. That wasn't so bad, was it? Elena ventured. He's not what I expected, Miguel admitted. Neither of them are. They're just people, Miguel. Different circumstances, but still just people. Theo asked if I'd help him build a model rocket sometime. Miguel stared out the window. I said maybe. Elena smiled. I think that would be good for both of you. Don't make it a thing, Miguel warned, but without his usual edge. For 2 weeks, a fragile peace existed. Miguel texted with Theo occasionally. Elena enjoyed her regular schedule, arriving home in time for dinner with her brother most nights. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She even began joining the hospital's weekly salsa night again, something she'd abandoned after their parents' death. Then everything unraveled. It began with a notice in their mailbox, The apartment building had been purchased by a development company. Rents would increase by 40% when their lease renewed in 60 days. "We can't afford this," Elena said, staring at the notice while Miguel paced their small living room. "You're making triple your hospital salary," he pointed out. "We should be fine." "That's temporary. 3 months, then back to normal pay, and most of it's going to catch up on bills and your college fund." Miguel stopped pacing. "My what?" "Mom and Dad's college fund for you. It was almost depleted after the funeral expenses and Dad's medical bills. I've been trying to rebuild it." "I never asked you to do that." Miguel's voice was tight. "I can get scholarships, or community college, or just work in a garage like Dad." "You're too smart for that," Elena insisted. "Mum and Dad wanted more for you." "How do you know what they wanted?" "They're gone, and you don't get to decide my future." The argument escalated, old hurts surfacing. By the end, Miguel stormed out, slamming the door behind him. He didn't come home that night, or the next. Elena called everyone, his friends, his teachers, even the police, who reminded her that a 16-year-old voluntarily leaving home wasn't technically a missing person. On the third day, Elena arrived at the Whitfield house, hollow-eyed and distracted. Mrs. Collins took one look at her and sat her down at the kitchen table. "You look like death warmed over," the housekeeper said bluntly, placing a cup of tea in front of her. "What's happened?" The kindness broke through Elena's careful composure. "My brother's missing," she admitted, her voice cracking. "We had a fight and he left. No one's seen him in 3 days." Mrs. Collins's hand covered hers briefly. "Mr. Whitfield should be told." "No," Elena said quickly. "I can do my job. Theo doesn't need the stress of worrying about me." "That boy notices everything," Mrs. Collins said gently. "He's already asked me twice this morning why you look sad." As if summoned by his name, Theo appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas. "Is Miguel okay?" he asked, his voice small. "He's not answering my texts." Elena forced a smile. "He's just busy with school." Theo's serious eyes studied her face. "You're worried about him. I can tell." Mrs. Collins gave Elena's hand a final pat before standing. "I'll check on your breakfast, Theo." Left alone with the boy, Elena found herself unable to maintain the pretense. "We had a disagreement," she admitted. "He's staying with a friend, I think." Theo climbed onto the chair beside her. "When I'm mad at Dad, sometimes I hide in the observatory." It was Mum's favorite place. "That's a good hiding place," Elena said, wondering where Miguel's equivalent might be. "He's not texting me back either," Theo said, pulling out a small phone. "See? I asked if he was still going to help me with my rocket." Elena glanced at the screen, then froze. The message Miguel had sent before going silent caught her attention. "Can't this weekend. Working at Ray's shop. Maybe next time." "Ray's shop?" she repeated. "Did he say anything else about that?" Theo shook his head. "Just that he got a job there. Is that important?" "It might be," Elena said, hope flickering. There were only 3 auto shops named Ray's in the city. She was reaching for her phone when Marcus appeared, dressed for the office, but looking concerned. "Mrs. Collins mentioned a problem?" Elena hesitated, professional boundaries warring with desperation. "My brother is missing," she finally said. "We had an argument about money and college, and he hasn't been home in 3 days." "3 days?" Marcus's expression sharpened. "Have you filed a police report?" "They say he's not technically missing since he left voluntarily." "That's absurd. He's a minor." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I have contacts who can help. What's his full name?" "Miguel Antonio Reyes. But..." Elena hesitated again. "I think he might be working at an auto shop called Ray's. He mentioned it to Theo." "Ray's Custom Automotive?" Marcus looked grim. "On Industrial Avenue. You know it?" "By reputation." Marcus's tone made it clear the reputation wasn't good. They hire undocumented workers, pay under the table, and cut every safety corner possible. No teenager should be anywhere near that place, especially without proper training. Elena stood, her heart racing. I need to find him. We will, Marcus said, the we falling naturally into the space between them. Mrs. Collins will stay with Theo. Let's go. As they drove through the industrial district, Elena stared out the window, fear and guilt twisting in her stomach. This is my fault. I pushed too hard about college, about being what our parents wanted. Children rarely become exactly what their parents envision, Marcus said, quietly. Theo's mother wanted him to be an astronomer like her. Sometimes I wonder if I push him toward the stars because of her, not because it's what he wants. At least you have a direction, Elena said. I'm making it up as I go. I was 26 when they died. I had my own life, my own apartment. Then suddenly I was responsible for a grieving teenager. You stepped up, Marcus said, his eyes on the road. Many wouldn't have. Sometimes I think Miguel would be better off with a real family, someone who knows what they're doing. There's no such thing as a real family, Marcus said. There are just people trying their best to care for each other. Some have more practice, that's all. They pulled into the gravel lot outside Ray's shop, a dilapidated building with cars in various states of disrepair scattered around it. Elena was out of the car before Marcus had fully stopped, her focus narrowing to a single purpose, finding her brother. Inside the shop, the air was thick with oil and metal dust. A man Elena assumed was Ray barely looked up from an engine as she approached. We're not open for service, he said, continuing to work. I'm looking for my brother, Miguel Reyes. Ray's hands paused briefly. Don't know him. He's 16, Hispanic, about this tall. Elena held her hand up. He'd have said he has experience with engines. Lady, I got guys coming and going all the time. I don't babysit. Marcus stepped forward, his presence suddenly commanding in a way Elena hadn't witnessed before. Perhaps I can refresh your memory. Miguel Reyes, 16 years old, which makes employing him without proper documentation a violation of labor laws. Ray straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Look, I don't want trouble. Some kid came in asking for work, seemed to know engines. I didn't ask his age. Where is he now? Elena demanded. A crash from the back of the shop answered her question. She pushed past Ray toward the sound, Marcus close behind. They found Miguel in a makeshift break room, cradling his left hand. A metal toolbox lay overturned at his feet. When he looked up and saw Elena, surprise gave way to defiance, then crumpled into something more vulnerable. Elena, what are you doing here? She crossed the room in 3 steps, already assessing his injury. You're hurt. It's nothing, just a cut. But he didn't pull away as she examined his hand. A deep gash crossed his palm, the edges already red and swollen. This needs stitches and antibiotics. She looked around for something to use as a bandage, settling for a clean rag from her purse. How long has it been like this? Miguel winced as she wrapped his hand. Couple days, it's fine. It's infected, she corrected, touching his forehead. You're running a fever too. Marcus stepped forward. We need to get him to a doctor. Miguel's eyes widened as he registered Marcus's presence. What's he doing here? Helping me find you, Elena said simply. I don't need your help, either of you. But Miguel's voice lacked conviction, and when he tried to stand, he swayed slightly. Elena steadied him. Miguel, please, let us help you. Something in her voice must have reached him, because he nodded once, allowing her to guide him out of the shop. Ray watched them leave, relief evident in his expression, as Marcus fixed him with a final warning look. In the car, Miguel sat in the back seat, his wrapped hand cradled against his chest. Elena joined him, checking his temperature again. You're mad, he said quietly. I'm worried, she corrected. And yes, a little mad. 3 days, Miguel. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you too." "I was going to call," he admitted. "Today. The hand got worse and I couldn't work. Ray said he doesn't pay for sick days." "Shocking," Marcus muttered from the driver's seat. At the urgent care clinic, Elena used her nurse credentials to expedite the process. Miguel needed 7 stitches and a strong course of antibiotics for the infection that had already begun spreading up his arm. "You were lucky," the doctor told him. "Another day, and this could have become serious." In the waiting room, Marcus made calls, arranging for Miguel's things to be collected from Ray's shop. When Elena emerged with Miguel, whose pallor made his exhaustion evident, Marcus stood. "I've had Mrs. Collins prepare the guest room next to Theo's," he said. "Miguel should rest somewhere clean while he recovers." Miguel started to protest, but Elena interrupted. "Just for tonight, please, Miguel." Too tired to argue, he nodded. At the Whitfield house, Theo was waiting anxiously by the window. He rushed out as they arrived, his face lighting up at the sight of Miguel, despite the bandages. "You're okay. Dad said you had an accident. Does it hurt? Can I sign your bandage? I have markers in my room." Miguel managed a small smile. "Maybe tomorrow, kid. I'm pretty wiped out." Theo nodded solemnly. "Mrs. Collins made soup. She says it heals everything." Mrs. Collins herself appeared at the door, ushering them inside with brisk efficiency that couldn't quite mask her concern. "The guest room is ready. There's fresh clothes on the bed. They might be a bit large, but they're clean. Dinner in 30 minutes. As Miguel was settled in the guest room, Elena found herself alone with Marcus in the kitchen. "Thank you," she said, "for everything today. I did what anyone would do." "No," Elena shook her head. "Most people wouldn't have dropped everything to help find a teenager they barely know." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "When Theo's mother died, I was so focused on his physical health that I neglected his emotional well-being. It took me too long to realize that healing isn't just about medicine." "It's about connection," Elena finished. "Yes." He met her eyes. "Something you understood instinctively with Theo, something I'm still learning." The dinner that night was subdued but marked by a newfound ease. Miguel, despite his injury and exhaustion, seemed to have shed some of his defenses. Theo's innocent questions about the auto shop drew him out, and even Marcus contributed stories of his own mechanical mishaps in college. Later, when Miguel and Theo had gone to bed, Elena found Marcus in the observatory, a glass-walled room on the top floor with Theo's mother's telescope positioned toward the night sky. "Theo's asleep," she reported. "Miguel, too. The antibiotics knocked him out." Marcus nodded, his attention on the stars above. Karina should be visible tonight. Sarah, Theo's mother, loved that constellation, the keel of the ship. "The Voyager," Elena said, stepping closer to the telescope. "My mother called it that, the one who journeys." "I've been a poor navigator since Sarah died," Marcus admitted, focused on the business, on tangible things I could control. Theo deserved better. "You did your best, as did you, with Miguel." Marcus turned from the telescope. "He's a good kid, smart too. The way he described that engine work, he has real talent." "He does," Elena agreed, "but I can't afford the technical programs that would develop it, not with the rent increase coming." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I have a proposition. My foundation funds scholarships for promising students interested in STEM fields. Miguel would qualify." "He wouldn't accept charity." "It's not charity, it's investment in talent." Marcus hesitated. "And the guest house here is sitting empty. You and Miguel could use it while he finishes high school. No rent, just continuing your work with Theo part-time as you transition back to the hospital." Elena started to refuse automatically, then stopped herself. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." 3 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of the garage workshop, watching Miguel explain gear ratios to Theo. The boys had developed an unlikely friendship. the older teaching the younger about engines while Theo shared his knowledge of astronomy. She still kept her apartment, unwilling to give up their independence entirely, but they spent most weeknights in the guest house. Miguel had enrolled in a specialized technical program, funded by the Whitfield Foundation, but earned through his own merit. "They're good for each other," Marcus said, joining her in the doorway. Elena nodded. Miguel needed someone to teach. Theo needed someone to look up to. "And what about you? Has this arrangement been good for you?" Elena considered the question. Her hospital colleagues had welcomed her back with open arms, respecting her new part-time schedule. Her relationship with Miguel had healed as he found his own path, and her friendship with Marcus had evolved into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. "I think," she said carefully, "we've all found something we needed." Above them, the first stars of evening appeared, constant and bright against the darkening sky. Voyagers all, finding their way together. For now, that was enough. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of love to break down walls and bridge any divide. Please do comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of family, redemption, and the triumph of love over pride. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.